You know, I've been trying to explain the most complicated cosmology in fiction of all time ever since I was a wee lad. It's been my dream. And prior attempts have completely failed at this for the last 10 years of my life.
You will fail! Bruh. Make a note of this. Dishonor on you, dishonor on your cow.
But despite that, I'm still going to try to unconfuse you on the most confusing cosmology of all time. Let's start at the beginning.
In the beginning,
there was a single black infinitude.
In the beginning, there was only one, a single black infinitude. Then the infinitude found release, and finally the darkness broke.
No, you'll never be Marnovu, not ever! Never! And then a burning light appeared that then birthed the universe, or the multiverse. Doesn't matter, because this isn't even the beginning anyway, because we found out in Lucifer 2000 that outside of all of this was just infinitely more creations and other creators that have nothing to do with this infinitude, because it's just a localized infinitude.
I told you that bitch crazy!
Let's really start at the beginning. To get there, we need to hop a train to 2008 and read Final Crisis.
Come back! Come back!
Written by Grant Morrison, who is the only author to ever tackle the meta of DC Comics and what lays outside of the literal stories found within fictional space. First, there was Monitor Mind, the overvoid. It's a reference to some religious notions like the Ain of the Kabbalah, or the absolute void of the school of the Maharishi, or the unified field in science. It's a void of total nothingness. This void is where manifestations of God come from. So it's not quite God in that sense, even though on the totem of the hierarchy it's at the top. But the God creators that speak and actively create things are a lower tier than this void. All of them came from this void. We can also get a backup of this with the Demiurge explaining how DC's God popped in from the void and then started to manifest itself later, as well as the Spectre learning more about how God manifested from a void in this other series. And then poof, one day, the void wakes up too and sprouts its own sentient mind and conceptually throws up at the idea that existence even exists in the first place somewhere upon it. Someone placed existence there without the overvoid's permission, and it can't stand that idea. It begins to infect this infinite mind to the point that it splits off the infected part as a probe and names it Dax Novu, the first monitor. Dax is sent to investigate this flaw and map all of existence. From here, we can start talking about DC Comics and what the significance of stories are to the DCU. We didn't get a map of any of this until 2014, so for now, let's just start where most usually start. The DCU was a multiverse. Then this horrific bad guy comes around named the Anti-Monitor.
Oh my God! What's wrong with your face?
And his brother, Mar-Novu. Not to be confused with Dax Novu, who I just mentioned. That's a different Novu.
Bruh.
The Anti-Monitor is crazy and starts to consume universes until all but roughly 3 or so of them are left over. This leads to a massive battle in the 1980s story called Crisis on Infinite Earths, a fight between the wrath of God, the Spectre, who's an angel, and the most powerful magicians, and even a fifth dimension imp named Yiz also helped. Darkseid 2, a few variants of Superman, and all the others firing on this one villain without any real effect. They defeat the Anti-Monitor through the efforts of the Flash, Darkseid, and Alexander Luthor, and all is seemingly well, except for the loss of 99.9999999% of infinite universes that were also eaten. Later, these 3 universes merge into one and stay that way for some time.
Oh my God!
Still later yet, this single universe then splits into 52, and with it, Mar Novu splits into 52 variants, one for each universe to oversee each of them. The new Mar Novu team is called the Monitors. Their story can be found in Countdown to Final Crisis, which came out at the exact same time as Final Crisis in 2008. Two different teams of writers at DC were writing during this era, and both of them used the same Monitor team stories in different ways, giving them completely different origins.
Why?
The Final Crisis story, these Monitors were the thoughts of the overvoid, projected to oversee existence. In Countdown to Final Crisis, they're splits of Mar Novu, overseeing one of the 52 universes. So during Countdown, the Monitors end up failing miserably and losing one of their most precious worlds, Earth 51. The comic doesn't rectify what happened to the Monitors at all. It just stops out of nowhere, and the Monitors are upset because the heroes are now threatening them if they continue to interfere with the multiverse, yada yada yada. Everybody hates the Monitors.
Oh, I hate you.
In an entirely separate canon, Final Crisis, the Monitors go through some seriously whacked out things that all result in the personification of existence, this giant suit of armor, fighting the original split off piece of the overvoid for the right to continue existing. This thing is story personified. Everything and everyone, not the overvoid, is this big suit of armor that the overvoid personified to better understand story, because the overvoid is stupid and naive and doesn't understand concepts or data, and all it wants is for all of that to be deleted and gone. So it makes existence itself fight non-existence, this vampire-looking thing, for its right to continue to exist and for stories to continue to exist forever. This comic ends with the Monitors realizing they're horrific parasites and destructive morons. They decide to off themselves and self-delete, returning back to the nothingness of the overvoid in its sleeping, unsentient void state. One of them is left in charge. His name is Nyx, and he's the son of that horrific vampire thing that is the embodiment of all the nothingness that consumes story. At the end of this comic, Nyx essentially becomes the new creator god and cosmic judge of existence. He reforges the multiverse that was lost during the Final Crisis battle. Some things were lost, like a bunch of universes, potentially this fluid medium called bleed space that holds all the universes inside of it, and some lost characters like the Angels of the Pax Day Army, Ultraman, and oh yeah, God, literally God, died during this series. God in DC Comics is named the Presence. If you want to know more about this, go read Lucifer 2000. But this character was wiped and potentially eaten by this guy, Rox Ogama, who is that horrific vampire guy's brother. So Nyx remakes the multiverse as he sees fit, and it's alluded to that everything after this point is a dream state of Nyx, who's sustaining existence through his dreams, meaning the multiverse is fueled by his mind and creativity. We don't get to see a guide map of his cosmology and revision until 2014 with this guide map. The author goes on to explain the meta in that this map is not just a map of DC, but of stories and the meaningfulness of all stories, regardless of the franchise. The Orrery of Worlds, the thing the Monitors oversaw in Final Crisis, contains a section that houses all of DC Comics and all the different canons and timelines within, and nearby all of Marvel, and nearby that Image Comics with Spawn, and so on. Every storyverse has its own grouping. The map is set up with specific meaningful arrangements that are connected in some way. These numbers don't represent regular universes, but entire author canons that have their own megaverses within. For example, Earth 51, the world that was lost and destroyed, was the entire Jack Kirby series of the Fourth World Comics. Earth 41, Image Comics, and Earth 8 represents all of Marvel. Each series is linked by horizontal and vertical lines, as well as circular lines that run around the ring of the center of the map in yet more meaningful ways, which means these worlds that share the same line or that sit on the same line are linked somehow through author canons, crossovers, or stories that are directly affected yet by other stories. Here you can see the Jack Kirby line, which includes Marvel and his time over there, as well as within DC, and here the Alan Moore arc, and so on. All of this was set up to be profound and interesting in some way. Just before the monitors of Final Crisis off themselves, they left a gift for the future residents in the form of a guidebook. This guidebook is where the map is from, penned and written by the monitors, and left as a weapon of sorts to learn how to defend against the largest incoming threat to the DCU, that threat being the Empty Hand, who is the embodiment of the reader's hand that closes the comic book. It's also important to note that this entire series, called the Multiversity, is alluded to take place during Nyx's dream state, as the comic guide once more ends with Nyx waking up. Nyx is sort of an Azathoth figure that dreams existence into being from 2008 and onward. There, I simplified the most complicated comics of all time.
We got the second George Washington. Congratulations!
What the
Have you seen my childhood?
Oh my God!
Got it? Good. Now chuck everything I just said right out the window. Burn it, toss it in the wood chipper, lock it away with your mind and forget it, because DC after 2014 ignored all of this and went with a different, less profound, less meaningful run on the context. I'll be honest, following this series, the next big era was the Metal series, in which we learn about a terrifying force named Barbados and a Batman who laughs from a dark, alternate, opposite version of this entire map of existence called the Dark Multiverse. Long story short, the source wall gets cracked and the main villain is defeated. However, this crack in the wall weakened it enough from Massive Secret to be revealed in the form of a cosmic mother named Perpetua. We would learn more about her in Justice League 2018, issue 22. We get exposition that everything we knew about DC was a lie. The Presence, the father of Lucifer, and the angels did not make creation. Instead, it was this weird chick named Perpetua who was tasked by the Presence to make creations for him. There's a race of entities called the Hands who sculpt multiverses to appease the Presence, Perpetua being the most reviled of them. Another long story short, when she was tasked to create her own multiverse, she did it wrong and in her own way, and ended up getting in trouble with the judges of the Presence, who noticed and placed her in a prison inside of the source wall, which became the exterior for the entire multiverse. The judges and Hands then fix things and make them right, leaving her sons Alpheus, the Forger Monitor, to continue making worlds in the Dark Multiverse that will rise into a positive creation and become normal worlds, or those who will die and sink to the Dark Multiverse and become hellish nightmare fuel. His brother, Mar-Novu, would oversee the positive creation, and his brother, the Anti-Monitor, would guard the exterior of creation from anything trying to get in. However, the source wall being created made the Anti-Monitor's job obsolete and useless. This makes him mad, and of course when you're mad, that means you turn horrifically into the evil side for no reason, which is exactly what happened.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
It jumped up a notch.
It did, didn't it?
Now here's where things get really heated for comic enthusiasts, because hardly anyone reads these comics to know that the tie-ins explain all of this Perpetua stuff to be an intentional farce. We were told that this is the true creator, and this unmakes the idea that the biblical God created things, as per the story of Lucifer Morningstar crafting creation that we all knew to be true for decades.
I may not know my flowers, but I know a bitch when I see one.
During this time period, a comic about Dr. Manhattan is released, and in that series he makes note that the Dark Multiverse is a product of someone messing with the timelines of Earth Zero, and not that it's the creation of Perpetua. This fact was lost to debaters who talk about the hierarchy online all day and make content about it. Many excuses were made about this panel. The story goes that Perpetua is weakened and requires power sources to fuel herself, and the same goes for the opposing villain from the Dark Multiverse, the Batman Who Laughs. At the end of this story, Perpetua is killed by the Batman Who Laughs, and then in turn is defeated by Wonder Woman, who was told to go bathe in the World Forge's waters inside of the Dark Multiverse. When this comic came out, I was the first to say clearly Darkseid wrote all of this, and it was him controlling everything and everyone. But I was shunned for saying all of this by thousands of people and viciously attacked online for it. Darkseid leads Wonder Woman to this forge of worlds, where universes are made or stashed away for being broken. All the while, Perpetua and the Batman Who Laughs never try to absorb the power of this forge, despite both of them owning this forge for a very long period of time. It's also weird that both of them had gone to such extreme lengths to find new fuel sources for themselves, but opted not to take the power of this forge. Darkseid, though, guides Wonder Woman to it, and she bathes in it, takes some of its power, and proceeds to kill the Batman Who Laughs with that newfound power. To me, this is hilariously obvious foreshadowing, but you have to realize that most of the scalar and debater community doesn't read comics, and they have no idea what foreshadowing even means. It's also during this time that another tie-in series was released called Justice League Odyssey. It's shown that Darkseid's plan was to create his own universe and steal power from it. He does this by entering hypertime and collecting mythology information from other worlds and compiling them into a place called the Ghost Sector. During this period, the heroes find out where Darkseid is hiding and they go fly to his secret location. While en route, a weird square panel is detected hurling in hypertime behind them. This comic alludes to literally nothing about this and doesn't provide commentary or exposition on what it is or why it's there. It's a random quick panel event, and the heroes have no idea why this flat sheet is flying behind them. It bypasses them and flies directly towards Darkseid's secret base that nobody knows about. On this flat panel hurling through hypertime is a symbol. The symbol is the symbol of Perpetua, the creator god from the Justice League 2018 series. After this page, nothing else is ever said or shown about a literal flying comic panel hurling through hypertime directly towards Darkseid's secret location. This is crazy weird stuff happening, isn't it? A flying panel in hypertime? But why? Why with Perpetua's symbol on it? What does this even mean? Why is it flying towards Darkseid's secret base? Further, in another issue called Secret Files 5 and 6, Psycho Pirate is explaining that he knows creation is only a few months old, while everyone else thinks it's 13 billion years old. He climbs out of the story and into what he feels is the gutter space between panels. Mind you, this location is supposed to be here on this map in the overvoid, the white panel space that is beyond everything, and the same location that the Justice League 2018 comic series said Perpetua is from. This is the greater Omniverse in context. Psycho Pirate here hears a voice. It's Darkseid, who explains that Psycho Pirate is stuck in a literal story plot that Darkseid wrote. The entire cosmology, the multiverse, is placed inside of a literal period at the end of a sentence that Darkseid wrote. Darkseid is. Inside that period is the world Psycho Pirate is from and the multiverse below, which is the creation that Perpetua made. Darkseid explains that he made this and was sitting outside of it the entire time. Immediately after this moment, Darkseid obtains his true form power without any reason or explanation in another main series called Incarnate Zero. He simply has his full power back after the defeat of Perpetua. There's no explanation for this anywhere. He suddenly has his full power restored. But why? Well, if you go back and read Death Metal, it was Darkseid who showed Wonder Woman that she should take the power of the World Forge and use it to defeat the Darkest Night. Remember, neither Perpetua and the Darkest Night could use that same Forge of Worlds for power when both of them owned it and operated it for such a long period of time. That's a mystery as why they couldn't do it. But it was Darkseid at the end of the story telling Wonder Woman to bathe in it and take some of its power. Keep in mind that both Perpetua and the Darkest Night again were both searching for power sources to fuel themselves, but never absorbed the power of the Forge.
Have you seen the light?
Yes! Yes! Jesus H. goddamn Christ! I have seen the light!
I hope by now you're seeing the plot points converge. A literal flying panel with Perpetua's symbol on it. Darkseid saying he wrote his own story container and stuck everyone in it, and he was outside of it. And then the Flash running to what they thought was this place called the Greater Omniverse in the Overvoid, but it turns out that the real Anti-Monitor is there. What about the son of Perpetua, that version of the Anti-Monitor? How can he be up there outside of his mother's creation and with a context of having been there the entire time, not even knowing that the Flash was alive? The reason is because the son of Perpetua, the Anti-Monitor, is not the real one. The real one was beyond the scope and boundary of this story container the entire time, having run around and eaten world after world until the Flash caught him. The Anti-Monitor says he's shocked the Flash is still alive, which is a weird thing because the son of Perpetua, the Anti-Monitor, knows the Flash is alive and fought him not too long ago. Well, no, it's not weird. The last time the authentic Anti-Monitor saw the Flash was back in the old 1980s comic called Crisis on Infinite Earths, when the Flash sacrificed himself to try to stop the Anti-Monitor. So this is why the Anti-Monitor is totally in awe that the Flash is still alive. All of this is showing that the Metal series revision of the Creator and the Multiverse is not the true historical account. The comics rectify that it's a container space somewhere that Darkseid made and used to take power from, so that he can achieve his true form once more. More so, which adds an extra confusing onion layer on it. While all this is happening, there was a great darkness looming outside and above Darkseid, who found out he was a part of this darkness. The Great Darkness attacks and is taking over much of the multiverse, until the heroes suddenly start to say in Dark Crisis issue 5 and 6 that Pariah, the man tied to the Great Darkness, was just crazy and that the Great Darkness wasn't real. In issue 4 of Dark Crisis, Lex Luthor figures out that there's some screwy things going on with all of this Omniverse nonsense, and it's clearly a lie and someone is tricking everyone. People just start to blurt out, the Great Darkness wasn't real, you're just hearing voices in your head. Even Deathstroke, who is directly under the control of the Great Darkness, is telling Pariah and the heroes that Pariah is nuts and thinks he's hearing and talking to a Great Darkness, but it's just voices in his head. All of this is out of nowhere. Where did the heroes figure this out? Why are they saying this? Nothing in the comics from issue 4 to issue 6 allude to this idea of this massive discovery that the Great Darkness wasn't real. Where did this come from? Well, it came from a tie-in series that hardly anyone read called Justice League versus the Legion of Superheroes, which deals with the idea of Batman and some others on a separate adventure while the Great Darkness is attacking. Some psychic powerhouse characters fuse together and amp their power exponentially and discover that a character named Epoch is the crux of all of this, and his information will lead to the collapse of the Great Darkness. Epoch should sound familiar to you. He's the guy who showed up in that other tie-in series named Justice League Odyssey, who was a time traveler roaming hypertime who had no idea who Perpetua was and said he can just unmake her and the Great Darkness with timeline technology that he has. He was in the process of doing so when Darkseid blew him up, of course. So the heroes say the name Epoch, and that instantly causes a voice to boom and the Great Darkness to envelop the team. Out of the dark steps Vandal Savage, who says there is no reason to continue this charade, and he's caught fair and square as the center of the Great Darkness that emanated from him. It's discovered that he generated the Great Darkness from a gold lantern ring that he stole and then wiped the entire timeline of the Great Darkness, making it so that it never was. Recall again that the Great Darkness timeline includes the Perpetua multiverse creation story of Metal 2015 all the way to the end of Dark Crisis 2022. All is one canon, confirmed here by the authors and the editors. So, the Great Darkness wasn't real, and they cut off Vandal from making it anymore. They then travel back to the era where Pariah was, a different point in time, and the heroes and Batman started to just suddenly shout that they know the Great Darkness wasn't real, which is why it was just randomly shouted in issue 5 and 6. So what happened here? What's all of this about? Well, many fans hate Final Crisis's version of creation, so they opt to run with the 2015 to 2022 Metal era as their preferred Cosmology origin story, except the comics of this era made it clear that it wasn't the original creation multiverse, and that many other worlds existed above it and outside of its parameters. We get some guidebook confirmations that the greater omniverse that was the location above and outside the Perpetua multiverse was restored to where it originally was, inside of the multiverse. It's also stated in an interview with the author that the greater omniverse's other name is the Lost Crisis on Infinite Earths multiverse, also known as Multiverse 2. The author explains here that they kept it a secret and that the other name of the greater omniverse, which was above the Perpetua historical account multiverse, was actually just the storyline that took place during Crisis on Infinite Earths. This multiverse is from the 1980s comic series and predates Perpetua's existence entirely, because her multiverse creation is contained by the Crisis on Infinite Earths multiverse, a creation inside of a creation. This was alluded to elsewhere in Justice League Odyssey, where they explain that Darkseid's Ghost Sector is intended to spawn creations of his own. With statements like this, that his energy source reads just like the totality, which is the source energy that Perpetua used to create her multiverse. This is foreshadowing, and the comics filling in the gaps of the story from Justice League 2018. I'm sure this is very confusing, and despite my efforts to try to unconfuse it for you, you're probably still even more confused than you were originally. And that's the problem with the ongoing last 20 years of DC Comics. This entire Last Generation's Ending Era series was spoiled by a guidebook written 2 years before the ending of the series, which said the greater omniverse is separated and connected by bleed space, but that cannot be because it's in the overvoid and outside of bleed space. The guide accidentally spoiled it 2 years too early. Bleed space is inside and in the interior. It holds creations. It's not outside in the overvoid or beyond that. The confusion level is too high at this point, and the comics end up rectifying the problem of Perpetua being the ultimate creator when we know it was Lucifer's dad. The comics rectify how Darkseid suddenly got his true form power back in Incarnate Zero, explained as Darkseid making his own story universe and writing a story of a god creator named Perpetua, and then stealing energy from this universe to fuel his higher form's power. After all of this, Darkseid learns what works and what doesn't. the dark multiverse was a place of horrific nightmares of interesting alternate worlds, dark worlds, and scary story, nightmarish things going on. The heroes there were villains often, and often meatier, beefier, less heroic, and way more violent. After the Great Darkness saga ends, the Absolute Era begins in late 2024. Darkseid knows what works and what doesn't. His tests are finally complete, and his trial run universe story, called the Metal Series, and the Trial of the Dark Multiverse is over. He gathered all of his data. Selecting what works and what doesn't, he takes aim at the Spectre after slicing off his arm, and uses his newfound power to craft his ultimate masterpiece, the end-all, be-all of Darkseid's will. The Absolute Universe is Darkseid's own custom universe creation that he runs, complete with characters that are very similar to the characters in the Dark Multiverse, because people enjoyed them so much.
Damn, boy, he's thick! Boy, that's a thick-ass boy!
The storyverse of Perpetua's creation didn't work. Letting this other character be the god of it was setting it up for failure. This time, Darkseid will handle it by himself as the ultimate godhead of his own story that he wrote, and within it, interesting, awesome tales of a thick boy Batman that everyone enjoys and a badass Superman. Now Darkseid knows what works and what doesn't, after his trial run of the past all ended in failure. But now, the Absolute Universe is the most successful, selling out comics all over the world, and Scott Snyder getting deserved praise, as he should, for this great new series. The meta of DC Comics extends beyond the boundary of the fictive membrane that Grant Morrison spoke to us about years ago, as we get inspired by and learn to love interesting and creative characters more and more during this new Absolute Era.